think it's good. Good morning, Redemption. Hi, welcome. Happy Sunday. Come on in, grab a coffee, grab a seat. We're so glad you're here. This is the first Sunday of the month, and as you know, we've been using the first Sunday of the month for what we have been calling Exploration Sunday. So we've created a space where spiritually hungry and curious people can explore topics that are affecting us and our communities. And so this morning we're introducing a new topic, and we are going to be digging a little deeper into what it means to be committed to the health of our communities. And we have a panel joining us this morning, which Christine will introduce in just a bit here. I'm really excited to hear from them. But first, we want to introduce Nick Corbett. We're going to have Nick come on up. And Nick, I hear, is quite the avid gardener. So Nick is going to be talking to us a little bit about his work in the community garden and how that is such a great illustration for what a thriving and healthy community can look like. So Nick, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so as was just said, about a year and a half ago, and I've always kind of been interested just based on upbringing in gardening and growing stuff. I've been around it. Definitely am not an expert, I've come to learn. But about a year and a half ago, it was actually Sergio and Mary that had found this community garden across the street from where they lived off of Charlie Street in Hamilton in Westside Costa Mesa. And that was the first I had ever heard that Costa Mesa actually has two community gardens that are kind of pay per space. They're 15 by 15 plots that basically you just have free range over, right? And so Sergio and Mary invited me over, knowing my interest, like, hey, you should come see ours and, and get plugged in here. There's a few open spots. So I did it a little reluctantly because it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was like, I don't feel like I can take care of myself right now, let alone like a garden full of all these different plants that need care. And I think it was even then that Sergio was like, come on, dude, you're going to love it. And if you need help and like you're not able to, you're out of town, like I'll take care of your space for you. I was like, all right, cool. And that was, I think, the first exposure to realizing that any gardening I had probably done before was very isolated and alone and just all on my own terms, to realizing, hey, you're actually stepping into a community that is fostering kind of this togetherness and this collective ownership, right, in the spaces that we all had. And so not only was Sergio and Mary kind of willing to do that, but I stepped in, met all these great people who had been there, some months, some like as many as over a decade that have had their spaces. And there was just a very collective mentality and a mentality, right, where everybody was willing to help, willing to engage, willing to, if you're newer and have questions like me, let me ask so many questions and never get tired of me. And so I realized, like, man, this is a really cool community I'm stepping into. How can I kind of be a part of it and continue to kind of foster that same DNA that they've already created? So not only have I received, and I think one of the cool stories is when I first started, my 15 by 15 plot was pretty depleted. I don't know what had happened there before, and all I knew is it needs like compost. I need more soil. And my thought initially was like, oh, I'll just go to Home Depot like I've done before with home planter boxes, and it's going to suck, but I'm going to spend like $200 on soil, and, it's just a one-time thing. What's up, Charles? Brian? And so I start telling that to this one neighbor who's been there and she's like, no, do not do that. Like, save yourself some money and come with me. And I'm like, where? She's like, I have a truck. Just give me some gas money. We'll go down south to, I guess it's a horse ranch down in South County that actually sells fully compostable horse manure. And fully composted, right? So it's not, it's not road apples, but it's the actually composted horse manure. And I kind of looked at her like, I don't know about this. But, going into that place, I wanted to have kind of this humility in this community that so many people had worked to kind of create before me. And so I was like, sure, let's do it. And honestly, that was, not only did it save me a lot of money, because it's like $20 for a full truck bed of compost, it actually was for the better health of my soil. Guaranteed that was better than what I was going to go buy, boxed up in a pretty package at Home Depot. And so I began to realize, like, in this community and through just the trial and error of experimentation and growing, and, I'm very much a perfectionist, but I realized, like, there is no perfection in growing plants. Like, you can do all the things that the instructions tell you to do, but the sun could be hotter, the raccoons could come, dig for grub worms and dig up all your plants. You could have aphids, you could have ant problems, all the weeds pop up that you've never even imagined seeing before. And so I realized in this community that, wow, there's such a wealth of knowledge that I can actually get the opportunity to glean from. And in this way, people are helping me along my journey. But as I started getting to know people and really dig into the relationship part, I realized, man, there's ways, right, that I can serve. That this is not just a community about what I can get out of it, but what I also can give. And so I've been able to help people unload, horse compost that maybe don't have like the physical strength to do so, or just listen and sit in conversation with people that where I've been honestly brought. There we go. Those things I don't worry about. Those that landed on me, that's what lays grubs in the garden that the raccoons come after. So I probably should have squashed it. It was fitting for this, right? I was talking smack. So yeah, I came to this realization that like there were other ways that not only was I tending to my plot, right, and stewarding the space that I had allotted for me, but I also was able to help others steward their physical spaces, but also be part of this community where there is love and care for one another. And so I've been able to sit in spaces and listen to people grieving, listen to people just struggles and issues and hear them out. And vice versa, people have been my sounding board when I want to talk or unload on something. And so, yeah, just tying to like the commitment to the community, it's really just been a beautiful place where I think not just, hey, there's people, it's community, there's relationships, but I've actually seen God show up for me in every aspect of a relationship. So to the creation, right, our relationship with the creation, I've learned what it's like to actually steward a piece of land and not just take from it, but, give back to its microbiome and its life. I've experienced just God speak to me through the plants, like the parables that we read that are so agrarian in nature. So many of us, if we don't have experience necessarily with plants, maybe the fullness of those meanings don't come to life, but so much of that has come to life in my own life as well. And then just experiencing God in those ways, and then just through relationship, right? Like, I am so grateful because all of us, right, we experienced this crazy pandemic at the same time, and so many relationships were stripped from us, but this was like one place that actually got to be a place of community, a place of just being able to be around people without, I guess, all the lockdown measures and whatnot. And through that, I've seen that, like, man, there is transformation in these relationships, in my life, in the lives of others, in the ways we practice our gardening skills, and I think just not only look to the needs of ourselves, but to the needs of those outside of our community. And so, yeah, it's been a really encouraging experience. I think going into it, this is kind of the final piece I'll say, going into it, I definitely had my eyes set on this. And this is, most of this is mine. I will say I borrowed a few pieces from some neighbors, but it's a community garden, we share. And so I think really my intent and focus was like, yeah, I want to grow my own stuff. Store-bought does not match homegrown, so I encourage you to try out some homegrown stuff on your own. But I think so often I get focused on the end result. Like, I want to see the fruit of my labor, and I'm focused on like the specific. I want to see the tomatoes, I want to see the corn, I want to see the thing, right? And I've realized through this and through these relationships, it's the thing is great. Like, it's great to enjoy the fruit of one's labor, but it's actually the process and having joy in that process and joy in those relationships with yourself, with God, with the land, with others that is truly the transformation and the fruit that I've been able to enjoy. And so I would just encourage you, wherever you're at, whatever communities outside of Redemption, or obviously Redemption too, that you're plugged into, just look for those ways that, maybe you're all working to a final result, but how are you finding joy in the process and in just caring and engaging with that community? So thanks for the time. Feel free to take some habaneros or okra or whatever you want. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nick. Man, I love hearing that story, and thanks for bringing your produce too, just to see. It's great. One thing that you said that really stuck out to me is you said I could just be about tending my own plot, but I recognize that this was like a community garden, and it's about like tending those around me as well, and participating in the health of those plots as well. And really what we're stepping into this morning is about that. And we've been spending the last 6 months really looking and digging into our mission as a church of being that we are a family of Jesus followers. I'm committed to the health of our communities. And we spent a few months looking at what does it mean to be family, recognizing that God has created this new family, a new humanity, that is about other barriers broken down, and created a new family. And that's what we are as a church. And that we're in formation in the way of Jesus, right? That we're following Jesus, that there's a way to be this type of family. And as we step into this last kind of quarter of the year, we're stepping into this last part of our mission of what does it mean to be then committed to the health of our communities. And really it's what Nick just said about, it's about like lifting our heads and realizing that it's not just about kind of tending our own family, but about being a part of God's healing work in the world. And that if we truly are a family of those who are formed in the way of Jesus, then we're going to be those who are impacting the world around us. And we're going to be those who are bearing witness to the peace and the justice and the joy and the love of Jesus. And so I'm excited to be stepping into this today. We have some friends that I've invited, some panelists that I'm going to introduce you to, and I just wanted to take a minute to kind of set this up before they come up and really impart what I'm sure will be a lot of wisdom for us. I want to just mention two more things. I think when we talk about committed to the health of our communities, some of you might kind of be thinking, oh gosh, she's just, and because it's me, maybe, you're going to be thinking, oh gosh, she's just going to ask us to like serve at one more thing. Like she's just going to ask us to like volunteer at one more place, right? And the Spirit of God might stir that in you. And I'm praying that God does. And some of you, maybe that's what needs to happen. Some of you need to maybe step out of one club or one more time at the gym or something that you're doing for yourself to step into what God's doing in the city around you. But this is what we're talking about this morning is really a more expansive way to see. And I think what Nick was saying about like realizing, hey, I'm a part of this community, even in like this community garden, realizing I'm a part of something here. And so this is really about us being a people who can see what God is doing in the communities that we are a part of and being intentional in those spaces and being open to how God might move us out into some other spaces too that maybe we're not already a part of. And then the second thing I just wanted to point out before I bring our panel up is the prophet Zechariah says that the people of God are prisoners of hope. And I'm always struck by this, and I often come back to it because I think in this season, in this time where it can be really easy to say, like, I can't be committed to the thriving of someone else. I am barely putting the pieces together of my own life. Like, this is just too much. And I think as people who are prisoners of hope, we don't have the luxury of giving up hope, right? We're the people of God. We are bound up in hope. And that is what we get to bear witness to in the rest of the world. And that happens when we can like realize that this isn't, like Nick said, about doing it perfectly. This is about a process of walking out the way of Jesus, a way of loving our neighbor, a way of seeing those around us, a way of seeing what God is doing in the world and stepping in to participate in his kingdom coming in this place. And so I just invite you this morning into this invitation to lift our heads, to see what God might be inviting us into, and to be reminded that we are people who see differently and we can be people who imagine a healthy community for the whole world. And I think it's going to be exciting to explore this month and the next couple months of what that looks like for us individually. So we're going to start with that exploration this morning with our panelists, and I'm just going to introduce you. I'm really excited particularly about this panel. They're all friends of mine. I consider them friends, and I'm going to share just a little bit about who they are before they come up here. So first we have Myra Macedo Nolan, who I have like these stories about each one of them. I feel like the introduction could take like 15 minutes. Let me just tell you, Myra, she's executive director currently of the Clergy and Community Coalition in Pasadena. She has years of experience as a pastor. She also serves as the chairperson of the Christian Community Development Association's National Board and has done that for years. That's how we first met. We road tripped together to Phoenix. We've road tripped to Phoenix twice together and had some experiences on the road, in the desert. She's someone that I called in a time of need, and she took me to dinner and said, what's going on? Let's talk it out. There's just a lot of things that I look up to about Myra. She's a warrior. She perseveres. She's a true leader in the church and in her community, both nationally and locally. I feel like one of the reasons I'm so excited to introduce you to all these people is they like embody what we're talking about. They embody what it is to be committed to the thriving of a community. Myra does that. Next, we have Kevin Mwang, who's the executive director of Solidarity in Fullerton. He was on the founding team there and is currently committed to developing neighborhood leaders to bring about equity in their city. In Fullerton, I have fun stories of, I don't even remember what city we were in. We were walking for a long time. I think it was Indianapolis maybe, just talking about what God was doing in our relationships. And I just remember feeling super encouraged after that conversation. He's someone I call up when I'm like, dude, I don't know what I'm doing. What's going on over there? Can we talk this through together? I'm really excited to have you here, Kevin. And Martin Pickett. Martin Pickett, honestly, is, we could say, the reason that I'm standing here. He is who introduced me to Phil and Jen 10 years ago this month. He introduced us and said, hey, you're both people that I really care about. I think you would really hit it off. And here I am. Martin is our host. He's the CEO of Clayval, this whole company region that we have been a part of that has hosted us here in our HQ. And so he's going to share more about his commitment to seeing a thriving community here. But I'm going to invite them to come up so we can get into hearing from them. So will you welcome them with me this morning? All right, I think we all have. What? Yeah. We're going to move back. Oh, this is hot. The microphone. This is really hot. We're going to move back a little into the shade. Okay. Sorry. All right. Yeah, there's water. Yeah. Hey, thank you each for being here. This is really exciting for me to introduce you to my church community and family. I'm just going to jump right in. We have some questions planned out, and this will really be a conversation. We'll see where it leads, how the Spirit leads us this morning. But I wanted to ask each of you, maybe we'll just start on that end, and we'll move this way. Just tell us a little bit about your context and like a snapshot of where you saw community thriving. Like just, I hope you have a lot of stories of seeing community thriving, but maybe one story you could share.
Yeah, so my name is Kevin Mwang. I'm the executive director of a faith-based nonprofit called Solidarity, and our founding time was right around the same time that Micah started up. So me and Christine have been traveling together in a lot of different ways, but our context is pretty similar too. It's a low-income, predominantly Latino community, a lot of mixed immigrant status within that neighborhood. And the areas that I've seen our communities really thrive in a different sort of way, I think, is even during this pandemic, just seeing the amount of resiliency that our neighbors had to just lean on, because everything, like we've heard it so many times, Black and brown communities get impacted in a disproportionate sort of way in these sort of pandemics. And to see the people there really struggling to thrive and do whatever they could to provide for their kids and for their community it's been a beautiful thing to be a part of.
Hi, Myra. So good to be with you. It's warm. Story of thriving. Yes?
Yeah, tell us a little about your context.
Oh, yeah, my context. Yeah, well, Christine shared that I'm the executive director of the Clergy Community Coalition in Pasadena, Altadena area. We have about 120-ish pastors on our list. We probably get about 30 or 40 of them, plus another 30 or 40 people that attend a monthly gathering. The other 30 or 40 people are nonprofit leaders, and also folks like the mayor, the city manager, the police chief, the superintendent of schools. And we talk about what is happening in our community. We pray for our community. And then now, and with my leadership, I'm like, we're going to do more than talk. And so we're talking about how we work together to address some really key issues in our city. And I love it. I love my community, so I love getting all of our brains and our resources together to do something really good. I have so many stories of when I've seen healthy community and thriving. I think the pandemic has shown us a lot of that, people just really pulling together. But I also remember a time where, and my community is really beautiful, so I thought about, should I share this story or not, because it could categorize us some way. But there was a time, I think it was 2007, 2008, where there was a lot of violence in our community, and a lot of gun violence. And so there was, and some of it was gang related. And there was a shooting that happened. A bunch of the kids in one of the mentoring programs that I used to oversee had been somewhere, and the gunfire was directed at them. One of the friends, not one of the students that I spent time with, but one of the friends that was there was shot in the head. And I got a phone call, it was probably midnight, and one of the guys telling me that this had happened, and he said, "We're at the hospital. This boy's mom is here. Will you talk to her?" So he hands the phone to this woman, and she only spoke Spanish, and I asked her, "Do you want me to come?" And she said yes. So, get dressed, go. And then that was this long journey of just getting to know her, but seeing other community members, the mothers of the other boys, whole bunch of families from the after school program really come around the single mom and support her during the time where she had to not work. She cleaned houses. She had to not work because her baby, who was like 15 years old, was in a coma for a long time. And so we took turns sitting in the hospital. So like if I was doing sermon prep or if I was studying, I think I was at Fuller at the time, I was just bring my stuff and then somebody else would come, and then somebody else would come so that she could actually go to work when she needed to. So yeah, community is beautiful.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Good morning. It's nice to be here on this part of the property. I'm not back here very often, so it's kind of a different perspective looking that way. But I actually started at Clayval in 1975 as a trainee right out of college. So I did not start out as president and CEO. It's been a long journey. But I have been in this job the last 27 years, and we operate, this is our headquarters, world headquarters. We sell into more than 100 countries, and we have manufacturing here in Canada, Switzerland, France, England, New Zealand. We're starting one in Thailand. We operate in lots of places, and we have sales offices all over the world. Our valves are used anywhere from your municipal water systems, so the water you drink has gone through our valves, guaranteed. Fire protection system, in the new World Trade Center, we invented a valve here on this property that has a new way of controlling fire protection systems. Or the Burj Dubai, the tallest building in the world, has our valves in it. So we do valves, and they're on. It's pretty exciting stuff, really. Okay.
I never cared about valves until I met Martin, and then I started paying attention.
Yes,
yeah.
and they're on every U.S. Navy ship that sails. So the protection of our country is all about our valves. Okay. The soldiers have a little bit to do with it too, but community is a great thing, and I have lots of ways I can go with this, but I think one of the things that impacted me was maybe 25 years ago. Henry Blackaby had a study called Experiencing God. And his premise was, join God in what he is doing. Don't say, Lord, please bless my plans, but join in what God has out there. We go by every day. And do we recognize what God has in front of us? Do we join him in what he is doing? Do we use our resources? So one of the things you want a very good example of community is Christine and Phil standing on a rooftop, I don't know where it was, about a year and a half ago when the pandemic started, and said, we're going to create this fund and get together with 5 churches. I don't know how many.
It ended up being 10 churches.
10
yeah.
churches, and it was enough for all. And they raised more than $500,000, and they jumped into the breach, and they experienced community, and were an example of community. And you want a great example? Here it is. Right here, they stepped forward, and we as a company were able to recognize that and contribute some funds. So that's where Experiencing God joined with what God is doing. God clearly had a call on Phil and Christine and others to join together and do things. That's community in action, really specific action.
Thanks. I love the kind of range we've got going here of different focuses on community. And I think before we get any further, I think one of the things we want to do is just define, like when we talk about committed to the health of our community, I mean, how would you define community? And then how would you define health? So, I mean, whoever wants to jump in with those, if you want to answer one or both, I'd love to jump off there before we get too far down the road.
Well, I'll start with defining community. I think it's really nuanced. This could be like a really long conversation, actually. I mean, any definition you find in a dictionary, I think, is insufficient. I think community is a changing and growing and expanding thing. I really believe that God places us in the skin we're in, you know, in a specific moment in time to be a part of that place. And so I define community primarily with place, like where you are planted and who is there. But sometimes I think that God puts us in places where a lot of people or most people may look like us, and I think that that's where I challenge that a little bit, because I think that God has so much to show us, one about God's own nature, but what our roles in the world through the one another's, especially the one another's who are different from us. And so sometimes I think that God wants to push us out of the place into other spaces that look a little bit differently, so that we can be a part of what God is doing in the world, you know, in that region or whatever. So, but place, but also like with the one another's who are different from us, I think are really important to me.
I think I'd define community as our little sphere of influence. And everyone has an influence. You are with your family, you're with your friends, you're with your neighbors, you're with your coworkers, and everybody has a community that they're dealing with every day. And some people have a big community because today's Sunday, so NFL plays. I happened to meet Drew Brees and his wife on their honeymoon, Jan and I did, and we became friends and knew them when they were in San Diego.
Of course you did.
And well, and there's a guy whose community is big. And he and Brittany are the real deal, and what they are doing in the world for Jesus Christ is a huge deal. I'm a little valve guy here in Costa Mesa, and I have a smaller community, and somebody may be working in our factory that has a smaller group of people that they influence. It does not matter whether you're Billy Graham or Drew Brees or Martin Pickett. We each have our community, and we each are called to do in our community. And the healthy part is when you are getting off your backside and doing something that you're called to do, because I'll just keep going in a minute more.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go on now.
I attend community Bible study, and it's a weekly inductive. You're in small groups, and currently we're studying 1 Peter, and this week it was talking about the faith and your works, and then it took us to Ephesians, and Ephesians talks about, I think it's Ephesians 2, talks about God has prepared works in advance for you to do. You don't have to go look, he's already created those works for you. So this is in this week's Bible study that I'm studying. Okay, it's not a coincidence that I'm up here talking about that. And then it flipped you to the next thing. It said, go to James, I think it's 10. And it says, faith without works is dead. Okay, that's convicting, and it's true. So the health of your faith is in doing. And it's in our own tiny little spheres of influence. That's all we're called to do. You know, people get so upset about what's going on in Washington or what's going on in the world. Calm. Look at what you have in front of you and touch that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. What about you, Kevin? What would you add to that?
Yeah, I don't know if I could actually define it. I think I've seen some values that have been present in really good community, and one of the things that has really spoke to us at Solidarity a lot is a sense of mutuality. So Just an understanding, like a humble understanding that you're not any better than the person that you're with, or they're not any better than you. So if you guys ever think of like your deepest connections and community, there was always a mutual level between you and your friends, whoever that was. And then when you look at Jesus' Gospels and the way that he did it, he was the one guy that had the full right to be like, I'm way up here and you guys are all down here, and this, I'll just minister to you with this discrepancy. And he never chose to do that. He always came onto the same level, always engaged in a very dignifying and loving sort of way where there was tons of mutuality. I think Jesus was always open to learn from the people that he was ministering to, which I don't see all the time in a broken community.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So values of community, that's helpful. So Martin's kind of mentioned some of the scriptures that he's been looking at around that helped with an understanding of healthy community. Are there scriptures that have helped you or informed your understanding of healthy community that you would add to that, Kevin or Myra?
I think we could always look towards Acts 2 as like a very tangible model of what it could look like. One way that it's played out in my life, hopefully maybe a quick story, is back in 2008, the Great Recession was going on, so trying to run a nonprofit in that time was terrible, as I'm sure Christine could note too. But we were at a very desperate place in our organization, and so the bank accounts just kept getting lower and lower and lower. We weren't able to pay all of our community or like staff members, and so pretty soon it became all the staff members coming together thinking, what are we going to do? How are we going to be able to really get through all this? And we decided to put all of our bills onto a big piece of paper, which is the most vulnerable thing to do, because they're like, why are you spending so much money on HBO right now? You don't need that. And then whenever somebody had an opportunity to cash a check, then they would be able to pay for whoever was on top of that list. So after a while, they paid for my phone bill, and then when I was able to cash my check, I was able to pay for Bethany's school loans. And we just kind of went through that. And that was us like actually living into this Acts 2 model, which I've never been able to do since then. And that was my first time ever getting into it. But one of the beautiful things was I never expected it to go outside of just my little group of staff members at Solidarity. But it got really, really desperate at one point, and we were about to lose we were trying to pay into the mortgage of the home that me and the executive director were living in. I was living with his family at that time. And we put out one more like email of shame to everybody and said, hey, I know you've been giving so much. I know you guys have been losing your jobs. I know that you have been foreclosing on your homes. But if you would like to, we could really use some money right now to be able to make sure that we don't get kicked out of this place that's inside the community, in the neighborhood. So we put that on a Friday night. Saturday morning, we got a little knock on the door, and somebody comes there. Hey, I got your email. Here's an envelope full of cash. And so it keeps going, more and more knocks throughout the whole entire weekend. And pretty soon we have enough to be able to pay for our mortgage, and then we're like collecting even more after that. So I'm starting to feel a little guilty. And then the last knock on a Sunday night was from this kid named Sergio, who is a kid that grew up in our programs, got labeled with all the negative labels that you can get labeled with, from illegal immigrant to at-risk youth to gangbanger, everything that you could think of. And he said, hey, I saw your guys' thing, and I went around the neighborhood and I asked everybody, would you like to contribute to the Nixons and Kevin?
Oh, Kevin.
And he came with this like envelope just full of tons of ones and fives, which is a beautiful thing, but it's a huge wad of stuff. And that was like all the understanding of the Acts 2 model up until this point was always this biblical knowledge that I kind of got from preachers or from Bible school or whatever the heck I was going. But God gave me this gift of going back to the mutuality thing. He allowed Sergio to teach me what it meant to be a part of this larger church family and larger community. And so that has always been kind of like my beautiful picture of what community could be like. I should have probably said that story when you asked the question beforehand.
I'm just glad it got out. I don't care when you shared it. You can't tell from my sunglasses that I'm crying. I knew about you guys putting your bills on the wall. I did not know about the neighbors contributing to that. It's amazing. Beautiful.
So I think that Isaiah 65 is one of my key ones. Also Jeremiah 29, but Isaiah 65 talks about this beautiful place where people are thriving, where people build houses and live in them and grow their own food and actually get to eat from the vineyard, where people can grow old. Children are playing and laughing and they're cared for and everyone's watching out for one another. And I think when I think of God's vision, I think like that's a glimpse of God's vision for a healthy community. And like we have no idea, like that's all because we can imagine what we can imagine with those words, right? But I think that there's so much more. But that's like like an invitation, like come and build this. And when you look at communities, oftentimes some of them look a little bit like that. Some of them you can see like, oh, but people are hungry in that area, or people can't afford to live somewhere, and so that's where you start to see like, oh, maybe I need to be involved in trying to make that actually happen, partner with God in bringing about that, like affordable housing or something like that. I was recently because I'm in Pasadena, we're pretty close to Fuller. One of our friends, Sun Chan Ra from Chicago, just moved to teach at Fuller, and so we were together, and we went over to his place, and he's living in Fuller owns a whole way too much property in Pasadena, but they own. Mark Leverton might be mad if he ever hears this. He won't hear this. And so we went to Sun Chan's place, which he bought from Fuller, and there's a whole little community, and it's like. You wouldn't know it if you just drive by it, because the part of the city where I live is really thriving, but it's like the black and brown part. But there's a lot of gentrification happening, but I mean it's pretty diverse. And that little area, like there are all these houses that a developer built that match. They're like craftsmen's, and then there's like these older ones, but it's kind of like a city block. Not as big, but kind of. And so I had never been in there. I had just always driven by, and I knew that a lot of Fuller professors lived there. And so, now my friend Sun Chan lives in one of those houses, and so we go in, and he's like, come in my backyard. So go to his backyard, and his backyard is literally like the back door and a little space for a fire pit and then a little hedge. And beyond the hedge is a grassy area that is community. So his backyard leads to someone's front yard, and that's the way it's set up. So have you ever watched those movies where like it's actually a horror movie, but they have like these little communities and everything looks perfect, and everyone's smiling and the kids are playing, and then there's something like really like crazy that happens. Anyway, it kind of looked like that. So we're sitting there on this fire pit. There's like teenage girls walking in and then go sit on someone's porch, and this mom comes out and says, I don't know where my son is, but I guess I have to walk around the neighborhood. And I'm thinking like, I live in this neighborhood and this is not walking around the neighborhood. And so it was really beautiful to see like how that group of people was doing community is able to. But man, did I in that moment want that for every kid in our community. I wish that every kid could just run around and go from porch to porch and not worry about what is happening around them. So it felt like this little insular place. And as much as I celebrated my friend now being in town and that actually existed, I at the same time was sitting there like trying to fix my face, because I'm like, this is so weird. It doesn't look like the rest, like just on the other side of that house is very different, So that vision is there, like we've been given it. And Jeremiah 29, and I'll stop talking, but that's where we're called to be a part of it. There's a vision in Isaiah 65, and it's actually brought into Jeremiah 29. But it's like now you're here, and you have to be a part of seeking what's good for everyone where you are. And that's where we get to jump into that vision that God has for people.
Yeah. So as they seek the peace and prosperity of the city.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want any verses or scriptures that have informed your thoughts on healthy community that you would add to any more? Okay, great. I think like kind of even, I'd love to hear your thoughts, just kind of jumping off of that around the biblical concept of shalom, like the idea, how has shalom informed your understanding of healthy community, and has that shifted for you even in over time as you've been a part of seeking the thriving of a community? I know like shalom is such a full word that we have a hard time defining it in English. It's like a wholeness. Often it's translated as peace, but it's like a fuller wholeness. And I just wanted to hear kind of how that might have informed your understanding of healthy community, if at all, or how you've seen that play out in your work.
I think the wholeness comes about when you recognize that as a person, as a Christ follower, That means all of us. So it doesn't matter if you're working at a valve company, or you're a banker, or you're an attorney, or whatever your profession is, or whether you're sweeping floors somewhere or bussing tables. It's the wholeness of who we are as people, and we are called to be involved and to participate and to live your faith. So it starts at work. So how do as the CEO, how do I do that at my work? Well, we start every board meeting. It starts at the board level. Is we start every board meeting with prayer and devotion. And I don't know how many companies in America do that, but we do. And that's something that I put in when I took this job 27 years ago. And it's just part of what we do. And then we have 30-some shareholders. And when we have the shareholders and then all the management people and their spouses together, more than 100 people, we start that gathering in prayer. So it starts, and I'm not putting myself up. I think it's the calling that we have. And when you talk about the wholeness, it's the wholeness of how you live your life and the words you choose, what you put in your head, what your movies you're watching or television shows you're watching. It's the wholeness of who you are. What does that translate into then the actions? And Nick's topic on fruit. What is the fruit coming out of your life? And that's the wholeness. So it's the incoming and then the outward wholeness of who you are as a Christ follower. So I think it's something that it's a lifelong work, and I'm certainly in process. And it's the striving towards and leaning towards holiness and towards Jesus, recognizing that I'm a sinful and I screw up a lot. Okay, let's just be honest. Anyway.
I want to just add something, because I know you're a very humble leader, but I think like when we talk about wholeness too, I know you're in the realm of like the board and the shareholders. But for me, it was really important when we got invited to be on this property. I started poking around, because I said, we can't be a justice organization and be at a place where the people who work here don't feel that justice is being done to them. And I know people from the neighborhood who work here, and I just started asking around, like, what's it like to work there? And people told me, they said, when the company does well, we get bonuses. Everybody gets bonuses when the company does well. Martin gave me a tour. He spent an hour with me, just at the time, like young nonprofit gal looking like homeless, looking for a space, like spent an hour touring me around. He said, it's important if you're going to be on this property to know what you're a part of and what's happens here. And I could tell, like, he knows people by name. I mean, there's like, how many people work here? A lot of people, hundreds, thousands.
On this property, 400 and some.
Yeah. And he was like greeting people by name and neighbors that I knew. And so I think that's an important part of like the whole, when we talk about like shalom and wholeness, and our understanding of a thriving community and how that plays out in our different spaces.
Okay, I'm going to steal the mic just one more second, because it has to do with Micah being here and now Redemption here. And it's a special relationship for the rent, okay? Okay, the rent is free, but I've asked, and this has gone on for all these years, is prayer for our business. We win. Seriously, we win.
What are your thoughts on shalom or wholeness or anything?
I just want to say, I love that. And I know that you don't tell that story for accolades or anything like that, but that's like a pastor's heart's dream come true, right? Is like to see people just want to, just give, and not just out of abundance, but just because you're somewhere and you can, and you want to be a part of what God is doing. And so I love that that's a starting point, that what is God already doing and how do we get to be a part of that? So your story brings me joy, Martin. I think, as I think about our city, our every neighborhood in our city, shalom is like, for me, the question I ask is, how is everyone doing? There's some parts, and Pasadena is Rose Bowl, the Tournament of Roses, the parade, and then so everyone doesn't know like all of the little nooks and crannies of Pasadena, but there's some parts of Pasadena that are pretty beautiful, like to look at, and for the world standards, and just they're there's wealth there. There's a lot of wealth there. And so how are those folks doing? How is their heart? How is their soul? And then how are the folks who don't have as much material, in a material sense, doing? And so that causes us to look at everything. What's our mayor's heart? What is the heart of the city? And some years ago, a bunch of pastors, we did a little retreat together. And because of what we saw happening in city politics and in policing and in housing and in the way that our immigrant neighbors are being treated, we're like, it seems like our city has lost its heart for the most vulnerable, but the church has not. And so we're not giving up. So we stayed at the table, and I'm not saying it's all great. We have a lot of work to do, but we're committed together, and we keep calling people to that. We keep calling our city leaders. When the mayor got elected, you better believe we gave him some time at our next meeting and asked him, what is your heart and your vision for this community? Because we want to work with you to bring that about. But we have to look at everything. What does public safety look like? What are the policies that are not helpful to the most vulnerable people? Can people afford to live here or not? Are our children adequately fed? Do the kids in our school district have the tools that they need to be able to compete and to be able to have, is there equity there? Is there equity for the Black and brown kids in this school system? Pasadena has more private schools than it does public schools. So we have to have conversations in the church. Why is that? And make decisions, call one another to make decisions to be in those places, because guess what? When you show up, then it matters to you too. Like when my kid is having the same kind of struggle as another child because they're at the same school, that it changes the way that our family makes decisions. And so calling people to sometimes, hard conversations about that, but they're necessary. But we have to look at all of the pieces that make up a community and seek. And for me, that's the shalom piece, is like the wholeness, when you look at a person and you're looking at their emotional, and their spiritual and all, we have to do that for a community.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's that wholeness is something that, as a culture here in America, we don't really do great at. We always pinpick one area that we want to be able to help in and assist in, but we don't look towards the whole all the time. So I think, kind of going to your question, Christine, like I look back at Jesus and how he entered into the world and where he decided to promote shalom or to foster it or whatever. And I think if I thought he was coming back in this time and day, I can imagine him going to one of the largest churches and taking over that church and, rewriting the way that the church does everything. But I don't think he'd actually do that. Like if you look back at his history, what did he actually do? He didn't go into the fanciest synagogue in the middle of Jerusalem or go into the temple and say, I'm going to recreate what's going here. Instead, he tried to recreate his culture amongst those who were like the most overlooked or the voices that went less heard. So he went to the people who were on the margins and decided, this is where I'm going to promote the shalom that me and my Father know of. And so in that space with the people who are overlooked and who often do not get heard, Jesus started to recreate his culture, the ideal culture that he wants us all to live into. And in that space, it wasn't just like relating with people one-on-one, but it was everything that Myra was talking about. It was about talking to the authorities in power, how you are diminishing the shalom that's going on in this area. So if we can see it here amongst those who are most marginalized, can that be replicated amongst the entire city or go further out amongst the world? But it had to start the way that Jesus did it. He chose to model it with those who were pushed to the margins, which I always found incredibly comforting to know that was the way that he entered in. And so when Solidarity stumbled upon that, because we didn't have this theology, we didn't have this understanding when we first started. We were just a bunch of stupid college students trying to do good, we're revolutionary for Jesus. But what actually happened was God just kind of like said, hey, these are the people that I've been creating the shalom amongst. Why don't you step in, like what Martin was saying? I've already been doing things in this neighborhood for decades before Solidarity ever came here. And after Solidarity falls apart, I'm going to continue to love these people. Tune into the way that I'm creating shalom in this neighborhood and learn from that. Learn from that community.
You said you find what Jesus did really comforting. I thought you were going to say inefficient. Yeah, comforting is a better way to look at it, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I have like a million more questions, but I want to have a chance for you all to ask questions as well. So get thinking about that. But let's go down the row. Maybe we'll just go this way, starting with you, Martin, and go down the row. How would you answer the question? What does it look like to be committed to the health of a community? I mean, we're talking about not just like what is a healthy community, but what does it look like for us as people, like as a church family, to be committed to the health of a community? You each brought up certain things, like you talked about prayer. I know we've been in circles where we've talked about like these different kind of 3 streams where people understand change. One is like the intercessory movement, like prayer. One is like city reaching, where Myra, when you talk, that's what I think of like you get the mayor together, you get kind of the key leaders in a city together to think through how they're going to bring about change. And then community development, or like what does it look like to be sitting with the people on the margins and like having seen change come from the margins. And one of the beautiful things of like the movements that we've all been a part of is that we recognize like the importance of those streams kind of flowing together and kind of being together. But I want to just kind of call that out, because I think sometimes people get really into like, this is how you commit to the health of the community, or this is the way, and you just got to do more prayer walks, which I'm all for. Prayer. That's how I pray for you. I walk the block. But yeah, I think that kind of braid of those streams, I think, is key. But would love to also hear from you. What does it look like to be committed to the health of a community?
It's a pretty big question with pretty big answers. As far as when you talk about commitment, are you committed? Individually, am I committed to growing in my faith? And so it starts individually. Am I committed in prayer and in studying the Bible? Am I in community? Am I trying to grow in my faith? I think it starts with that. So it's commitment of that. And I think it's a struggle for all of us. Our whole lives is, you get distracted by work, you get distracted by the world, and all that is thrown at you. And so that starts there. But I think the commitment is, and I've talked about it all morning, as far as your actions, what are you choosing to do? So I think the commitment is whether you're with community development, if you're working on nonprofits or for-profit, what's your commitment level individually, and then in the sphere of influence that you have. So the commitment is whether you're doing something and whether there is some fruit, like Nick was showing us, that was beautiful, or is your fruit not so great looking because you didn't invest in it. So I think it's kind of a broad answer.
Yeah, I hear you saying a commitment to our own formation and relationship with Jesus is like the root. Yeah.
I love the way you talked about these streams being braided together. When our city hall was being retrofitted, this is probably, a dozen years ago or so, we had the opportunity, a bunch of pastors were able to go down with hard hats down into the foundation underneath the building when like parts of it were being lifted up, and actually pray and lay hands on the actual structure. And it was a really meaningful time of prayer. And then we see, like, when we're outside of City Hall together praying for the city, but also sometimes showing up at a protest, we're there and we know that place. We know what the foundation actually looks like. So the praying and the action piece they're essential. I've told some people, like, we are all actually called to be activists because the greatest command is love. So the love command is not just a word. Love actually has, if you tell me you love me, like, I'm going to have some expectations of you. So it's important to know, really, what is that? What is someone's definition of love? Because you might disappoint people. But because we're called to love, and love is an action, then we're called to be involved in action. And so that's not really answering the question, Christine. But I'm just thinking, it's so big, and we could talk about this. I keep saying this because I do like to talk about it, but also do things about it. But the staying at the table, I guess it would be like my big commitment piece. Like even when things get hard and when people are upset with you and when people have pegged you because of the way you talk about things, So as a pastor at a probably the largest church in our city, and a Latina, and married to an African American man, and my son having some fears around being a tall black boy that looks like a man, and some of the things that come with that, and some of my worries as a mom. So the way I talk about some of our issues in policing, are because I'm a call it out kind of person. That's just like how God made me. And so then sometimes I get pegged as a person who doesn't like law enforcement. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. It's the furthest thing from the truth. Ask our police chief. I mean, we may sometimes.
You're the only person I know who ever brought the police chief to our national conference with you.
Yeah, he was the deputy chief at the time, one of my best friends in the city. And right now, our chief just announced he's retiring in January. And so we have an African-American woman who is the deputy chief, and she'll be the first African-American chief of police, at least on an interim basis. But I'm like, okay, sis, what do you need? How do we come around you? Like, I want you to succeed, and I know how hard it is for you to do your job because everybody hates you. And so how do we change that together? But those are the things, like, it gets hard. It gets hard. Like one time at a recent CCC meeting online, one of our pastors got into it with the police chief online, and we weren't used to doing that at our meetings. And some people were super uncomfortable. And so the next time we gathered, I said, okay, so last month, this is what it means to be in this together is sometimes we're not going to agree, but we're committed to one another. We're committed to this place because God has us all here. And so we're going to keep at it. And so like now we're getting used to that, right? Like not walking away. Yeah.
Beautiful. Stay at the table.
That's awesome. Yeah, you strengthen that muscle of people going through conflict and then still coming back and uniting on one. It's just gonna make it even more strong after that. That's
sometimes
awesome.
it doesn't happen. Like sometimes people just don't show up.
For sure. Well, thank God for your leadership, Myra. That's awesome. I think can you actually reframe?
What does it mean to be committed to the health of a community?
Okay, that's what it is. I think it's listening well. So it's like, and it's two parts in that, or actually three parts in that. One, listening to the community and the neighbors or the people who are on the margins who don't get to speak up all the time or are not being listened to when they are speaking up. The second thing would be really listening to God, and as we've been alluding to this whole time, like what has God already put in place or put into plan that we can align ourselves to. And then the third one that I think doesn't often get checked too much is just like listening to your own heart, figuring out where Kevin Mowong's ego is coming up and is trying to drive the narrative in a certain sort of way so that it looks good on me or looks good on my organization or looks good on the institutional church. Like those three things, if we're like listening really well and we're being faithful to actually follow through with what we're hearing, what God's gifted us in these little nuggets of truth, then I think we lead towards more of a healthy community.
Yeah. Wow, there's a lot there. Be committed to our own formation, stay at the table, and listen well. It's good stuff. Well, I have a lot more I could dive into with them, but I want to give us some space to reflect on what we've been talking about and ask some questions. And so Jess is going to ask some questions. But as she's getting ready to do that, I want you to just take a minute and reflect on where I'm really going to give you a minute and think about what are the communities. Maybe it's been coming up for you as you've been listening. But what are the communities that you are a part of? So we've talked about work. We've talked about neighborhood, your book clubs, your sports teams, your kids, your schools. Maybe that you're a part of, or your kids are a part of, or your garden, your community garden. What are the different communities that are coming to mind for you as you're listening? Or is there a community that you're not a part of that's come up that maybe the Lord's piquing your interest about, or you feel a sense of invitation to be a part of? And then take a minute we're going to have a chance to ask questions. So if you want to jot down your questions so that you can get to the essence. We talk a lot here at Redemption about the essence. And we have some of these journals. If you, at Explorations, we particularly want to equip you to be able to reflect. If you don't have one, you can grab one off the Connect table right there. So we'll just take a minute, and then Jess will be ready to do questions. All right, so Jess has the microphone, and she's going to come around and kind of facilitate our question and answer time. If you have a specific person you want to ask a question to, we can do that, or if you want to just ask it in general.
Nice.
Either way. They've been, everyone knows that they can say, I don't really want to answer that. So that's on the table too.
All right, Beth, go ahead and kick us off.
Thank you guys so much. I've heard what you've been saying about just staying at the table and taking action in your community, and that's what our faith drives us to. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts or advice on just the personal, emotional aspect of being a person who is thriving in their own life and living in a community where people aren't thriving. I think that I can sometimes be paralyzed by just the guilt and the sadness of seeing people who aren't thriving and they're not being shalom in parts of my community, and yet living in that in my own personal life. And I'm curious what that looks like for you guys as you experience those inequities or just the reality of the broken community you live in, and sometimes that not being the reality for you personally.
I think I would characterize it as Christ followers. All of us are under attack from time to time, and sometimes it's more intense than others. And when you are experiencing those inequities, when you are living through the unfairness of the world, you buckle up and ride on through that. I was going to tell this at the end, but I'm going to tell it now because it's relevant. Is, the American buffalo or bison, and what they do versus cows or other animals when there's a storm. There's a tendency to run from the storm for us as people, and the American buffalo runs into the storm. And they face the fears, and they face that. And I think and it's something that I just came across recently, that description. I thought that's really relevant, especially as we are under more attack. And you think you're under attack now, it's going to get worse, the direction the world is going. And we are obliged to charge into the storm and face it and do our best. And sometimes it doesn't feel good, and sometimes it's hard, and you feel like you're alone. But we're not. Throughout the Bible, and Joshua 1:8, I think, is one of my favorite verses. I will never forsake you. I will never leave you. I'm with you. And it says it over and over and over in Joshua, just that first chapter. And it's throughout the Bible. You're never alone. So face it, and sometimes it's hard. It is hard.
Aren't bison herd animals also?
They are.
Okay.
And they run into the storm together.
I'd love to, thank you. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that too.
I was thinking about your question because I've heard it asked in a lot of ways a lot over the last, especially over the last 10 or 15 years. God wants to heal that. God wants to heal that state of paralysis that we sometimes find ourselves in when we just don't know what to do because it's too much. And our healing is tied up in one another's healing. So when you see pain and you make a choice to be in there, even if you show up and some people think you don't belong there, but when you just keep showing up, and you keep being a part, like that becomes part of your healing, and your wholeness becomes part of the healing of someone else. And it's a cyclical thing, and that's like why we are created for community. Like we are God made us for this. And so just go. And you know what? If it breaks your heart and you have to like shut the door and cry for a whole day, like girl, just cry it out. And then when you get it together, you just go right back out there and you just be present. I think that's the biggest thing. The victory of the enemy is when you are so your heart is broken, you just don't know what to do, and then you just shut yourself in and you don't show up.
Yeah, Taylor.
When Christine asked about, like, think of your communities that you're a part of, I just kind of, my numbers just kind of kept going up and up and up and up. And I just thought, man, I'm a part of so many communities, it feels like. And some I haven't chosen, I'm just in it. And, that your passion can be maybe stronger towards one or the other. Just maybe thoughts or encouragements on maybe feeling spread thin across a lot of different communities that you're a part of. Thoughts or encouragement maybe on that, so.
Are you more extroverted than introverted? Yeah. I don't know if this is common for everybody. I thought I was more extroverted, and then the older I got, the more grumpy I got, I guess, and I just wanted to become more introverted and escape from people. So I think I can't say for sure, but maybe in your case, it's gonna take time, and then God's gonna kind of whittle those, like, the communities that He really wants you in and invested in. I think going back to what Martin was saying, like, which communities for you are producing the most fruit? Where are you becoming more loving, kind, peaceful, selfless? And then those are the ones that I would recommend, like, okay, let me stake my flag here for a little while and hang out here because I think God's doing something. And then God's going to switch it up on you. Once that starts to work, He's going to be like, I don't want you at that place anymore. So we can move on. You can become more introverted, like us.
Kevin, I would agree with you on that. And being older than anyone here.
I was going to say about getting grumpier the older you get.
No, it's not grumpier. I'm choosier. I'm more selective, and I'm serious about that. I don't want to spend time with people that I don't want to spend time with. I don't want to have shallow, crap relationships with people. I want it to mean something. I'm in my last quarter. What am I going to do to make a difference? It's who I choose to be with, and it's those organizations, it's those communities. Make a choice and be wise, and then run your roots deeper in those. And the shallow ones are gonna, storms come and you're gonna fall over, and it's not gonna mean anything anyway. And I think certainly as I've gotten older, I'm choosier for sure. Just what you were saying.
John.
So one of the things each of you has is like not a lack of commitment. You've all been part of the communities for a long time, and I wonder, there's a lot of things that seem very urgent. And how do you guys balance that long-term commitment with this sense of, like, the day that kid gets shot, suddenly there's all kinds of things. You're like, this infrastructure stuff has to change because kids are dying today, where you also have to have the long-term stable community building.
Well,
We're all staring at each other.
yeah, that's really hard, because when things like that happen, then you have to drop everything, because that's what it means in the closest proximity to be with the people where God actually put you, right? And then you have to, you can't do it all. And so sometimes the paralyzing thing comes when you look at it and you're like, dang, this is so messed up. Like, where do we even start? And I think, like, God has ideas for you, like very specific ones. And so starting to ask that and do it in community, like where is the place that God is calling me to step into, because I can't solve everything. I think that's really important. Did that kind of get at your question?
I think that the Holy Spirit will call you and into action and make those choices. So when Christine and Phil stood on top of a building and had 10 churches come together, there was a sense of urgency at that moment to make a difference, and it made a difference in hundreds of people's lives in this community because they stepped forward. There was a sense of urgency. They jumped at it. And I think they were called. I know they were called. So there was a calling on their lives at that moment. And I think the more specific you can be attuned to what God has out there for you, you can't solve all of the homelessness. And you can get absolutely crushed by the sense of the problems of the underserved and the undereducated and the income gap that's getting worse. And it's overwhelming. But there's things out there, the sense of urgency, jump on them.
I think I would add one thing too. I remember driving to church with my dad, and we drove by his office, and I thought, how that must be horrible to drive to the same place 20 years in a row, like every day, to go to the same place for 20 years. I remember as a kid thinking, I'm just out of here as soon as I can. And how could you do something for 20 years in a row? And now I've done it. Now I've been here in this, like on this particular parking lot for almost 20 years. And I think it's like the everyday, and the Lord says to pray, give us this day our daily bread, right? Like, and so it's like every day, Lord, what are you about? How can I be about that with you? And then I think what you were saying about the formation of like, how is my own life aligning with these values of community? How am I reconciled to my sisters and brothers? And Lord, how, like every day trying to like live into these things that are the way of Jesus. So that when the Spirit does say like, this is the thing, like you're ready to go. And I guess it's just like a day-to-day thing that all of a sudden it's like been 20 years. But yeah, I think some of it is just discerning the Spirit of like when it's urgent. And the other thing is community. I mean, Myra and I got arrested together in Washington, D.C. And that was because Michelle invited us and said, come. And I said, Michelle, why did you invite me? How did I get on the list of who got invited to stand up for immigrant rights? And she said, because I invited the people who I knew would come. That's what she told me. And I think like to Myra's point about staying at the table, it's like when there's an invitation like that, it's just all of a sudden you're like, this is the one, this is the thing and so it's just, I think some of it is just that discerning the Spirit and knowing. I think we have one more question and then we're going to wrap it up.
Make sure it's still on. Drew, thanks.
Thank you. So all three of you run organizations, for-profit, not-for-profit, with employees and staff. I guess, what questions do you ask yourselves to evaluate kind of the health of the communities that you're building specifically from like kind of an occupational standpoint? Like how are you asking yourself questions regularly, challenging yourself, checking in? Like what does that look like as you're building community for your occupational teams, I guess?
I have more years experience, and we have a lot of people.
We're deferring to our elders.
I think it starts in the hierarchy of an organization. And what are your values? How are you defining your values? Do you commit them in writing? Do you get buy-in as much as you can? In our case, there's the owners of the business and the board of directors, and there are value statements and organizational principles that I have drafted, published, and every year the shareholders vote, yes, we believe in these things. So it comes down to ethical, moral behavior, how you treat your people, how you treat your vendors, how you do all of that. On a day-to-day basis, it's how you appreciate your people. There's the fairness in wages and salaries and benefits. There's appreciation. How do you show your appreciation? Are you loving your people? Well, you can love your people by showing appreciation, whether it's a luncheon or whether it's the bonuses that we have done for 20 some years. It's, are you being fair? So you can be a profitable company, you can be well run, and you can do it in how Jesus would tell you to run your business. And there's all kinds of books on it, but I think the living it out is the challenge, and it's a daily challenge. How are we treating our people? And how are we giving back? So we give back, and we created each family. There's 3 families that own our business. Everyone has a foundation, and we help create those. And then the management of the company gives away hundreds of thousands of dollars so we effectively tithe as a business. 10% off the top goes to those 3 family foundations in the management fund. So it is tangible. It is real. And then as the involvement of that, there's an organization, I love this organization, I'll shut up in a minute, called Water Missions out of Charleston, South Carolina. And they're a faith-based folks that go around the world, and they put in water systems. So one of the biggest health problems anywhere in the world is dirty water. And then, so they're putting in clean water, and it was started by a guy named George Green, and he's done this for years, and now it's next generation. It's grown, and they have corporate sponsors, lots of big companies, and they've grown. It's wildly successful. God has just blessed this organization. So here we make valves used in water systems. So how do we get that involved? Well, in Africa, they have some systems that are big enough that would need our valves. So I put the African folks in touch with our European operation, and now our European operation, the guys there are tasked with working with this organization in Africa, Water Missions out of Africa. And they said, Mr. Pickett, what discount should we give them? I said, you give those valves for free, and you work with them, and you help engineer, and you help design. Thereby, in our organization, How Do You Live Your Faith, the people in our Swiss operations that are dealing with the people of Africa learn now about giving back. And living back in their community is now some folks in Africa not having water systems. So how do you do it? There's some practical ways of doing it in writing and in actions, and it goes down to how you treat everybody that you work with and the work for you. Long blown explanation.
Thanks. Do you guys want to add anything to that one?
I don't particularly feel like we're doing a good job at it. We're trying our hardest, but one of the things that have kind of snuck up on us that we never saw coming was like this massive power dynamic that just kind of, even though I'm a person of color, I'm still male, I'm still Asian, Chinese American, come with a lot of privilege into the community. The youth and young adults that we were hiring to get into different positions in our job, we thought everything was going great for them and that they were loving this job and they were loving their role and their ability to give back to the community. But really, there was just a very strong power dynamic between the culture that we created at Solidarity and what we were expecting for these young adults that are coming up that created enough dissonance that they didn't feel like they can fully verbalize everything that they were feeling and experiencing. Comes back like 5 years later, we're having a group together and there's some broken relationships, so we're trying to work it all out, and they say to us, you know, the way that you guys kind of treated us, despite all the intentionality that we had to absolutely do the opposite of that, to empower, to equip, to amplify their voice, there was still this ugly power dynamic that just comes naturally. And so now I'm in the process of working with my executive team to figure out how do I negate power dynamics, which I don't think you could ever really do, right? But how can I lessen it, and how can I increase the transparency and the ability for those who are coming up into our organization to have the full voice, everything that we preach about at Solidarity, that their voice is amplified, that it makes a difference, that everything that they do that wants to contribute to the organization actually kind of goes through, and we can co-create this thing together instead of it being a top-down thing. Like the original thing I was talking about in the beginning, you didn't see that discrepancy of Jesus just say way up here and everybody else down here. And we've tried so hard not to have that, but we inevitably recreated it. And now it's just, as an organization, again, becoming aware of where my ego is driving things, where the name of Solidarity, the brand, is driving things, and really lessening that for the greater good, which is all these kingdom principles that we keep talking about here, that is based on this mutuality and love. Is that kind of answer? Yeah. So we suck at it.
But it sounds like, I mean, I appreciate you sharing that, but it sounds like too, I'm hearing from both of you, it's like being clear, like what are our values, and then like how are we actually living into that, and being willing to say, you know what, we're missing the mark, and so we have to come back around.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is what are the stories, like what are the outcomes? Like, tell me a story. Tell me a story about what you've set out to do and how that actually has changed. I think that goes a long way, and I know that there is really a need for other kinds of metrics, and that the narrative ones are not often as valued, but they're the ones that are the most powerful, that actually really ignite, and motivate other people to be involved in things. I want to just say, I think that the church hasn't always done a great job, like organizationally, at evaluating. I don't know why it's so hard, and so I was on the staff of a church for 20 plus years, and there were seasons where we did these kind of performance reviews, evaluations of the work, consistently, and then there was times that we didn't do it at all. And so, I mean, if anybody looked at my file, like there would just be like review after review after review that said like Myra's excellent, like excellence and leadership, all these things, and I would go to those meetings all the time. I'd say, okay, I'm looking for the thing that like I need to be better at, and I was almost never, if I didn't ask specifically, like give me something, I wasn't given anything. And so what is it about us that only wants to uplift, and not like that part of our uplifting is also like helping one another see the things that we may not see when we look in the mirror, and so I just think we need to do better. I think that we can learn a lot from corporate spaces about how to do that well. Yeah. So just a little nudge to, I don't know how y'all are doing. I'm sure that you're doing a great, Christine. You're doing a great job. Also, I've been in this role for a year, and our board decided that after 6 months, we would have a conversation about how it was going. And I've been asking every month for the last 6 months, and so hopefully we'll get there.
Here you are again. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, that's part of being in community, right? Is like, how are we giving honest feedback to one another in ways that are helping each other grow? Yeah, beautiful. Well, I'm so glad that we've had this time together. And I want to, you had said you wanted to share about the buffalo. Is there, okay, I want to just say, is there one more thing that you would leave us with as we close out our time together?
Good for y'all spending the time and challenging yourselves. Christine, good, really, really well done. As a group of believers, to have the conversations of how do you grow together in the path forward is awesome. So really, just commend you all.
One of our mutual friends, his name is Jonathan Brooks. He's a pastor in Chicago. And he's also on the CCDA board, and he wrote a book called Church Forsaken. And the premise of the book is that there are no places that are God forsaken, only places that are forsaken by the church. We call them that. And so we had him come out recently to do a pastor's retreat, and he was encouraging our pastors, and he said we examine places in Scripture where. Did I do something? There it is. We examine places in Scripture where people were tied to place, like Saul of Tarsus, like Jesus of Nazareth. And so he said, what will be said about you? How will you be recognized? And so I want to say, like, what does it mean to be Kevin of Fullerton? What is that story? How is that story going to be told? Or Christine of Costa Mesa? That is really important. Your being is tied to somewhere, and how will people talk about you? What will be different because you are of that place?
Well, thank you so much. This is just, I just want to spend all the days with you all. And I'm so grateful that we could be here all together. Can you join me in just thanking them and giving them a round of applause? Thank you so much. We can go ahead and sit down.
Well, Martin, Myra, Kevin, thank you all so much for giving us a lot to chew on over the next month as we dive into this topic. I want to quickly just touch on some family business, which is our fun term for announcements. So these are the things that we as a family are stepping into in the next month. Just want to call your attention to a couple of them. First up is October 21st. Save the date for our next West Side Nights. The last one was such a blast, so much fun. This is a family-friendly event and kind of along the lines of like a fall fest. There's bounce houses, food, lots of fun, and that's at Family Christian Church. We'll send out more details later, but go ahead and save that date. Our formation method training was canceled. We are working on securing another date for that. So if you were interested in stepping into the next training, just keep an eye out on our weekly. If you're not getting our emails, make sure you fill out a Connect card at the Connect table so we can make sure to get you in on the loop. And we'll get you the date for that next training once it is scheduled. And then join us next Sunday for our very first Formation Sunday. We are so excited to be adding another gathering. So we'll now be meeting the first, second, and third Sunday of every month. And Formation Sunday is a space where we dedicate ourselves to our own formation as a community and becoming more like Jesus, diving a little deeper into these practices that we are exploring. Lastly, we are a people who believe that God is a God of generosity and abundance, and as a reflection of that, we give out of a place of just having enough and having abundance. And so we have our giving box right over there at the Connect table if you'd like to give on your way out, or you can also visit our website, redemptionchurch.org, to give there. All right, I'm going to just speak a benediction over us and send us on our way. As we go, may we, the people of Redemption and the people of Costa Mesa, be seekers of your shalom and practitioners of your peace. May we continue to ask ourselves, what is God doing and how can we join him in it? Lord, help us to listen, help us to act, and help us to remain at the table when things get difficult. Let us hold tightly to the hope we have in you and help us commit to bringing that hope to life in our communities. Go in grace and peace, and we'll see you next Sunday.